What's happening, everybody? We have the Scottish Open this week for PGA, and I want to do a little bit of a breakdown for how I build my lineups for a couple of reasons. First off, I'm coming off a really big GPP hit in PGA. You guys could see it on the screen right here. But on Sunday, I did win $50,000, came in first place in the $5 contest. I forget what the name is for that particular contest. I think it's like the Drive the Green, 250K, 50K to first place. More importantly, though, I won the GPP. So I wanted to do a breakdown of how I build my lineups using the tools here at Stokastic, and also let you know that because I won this tournament, we're doing a sale. You could sign up for any package at Stokastic, not just for PGA, but for any sport. And that could be for the Sims, just data, our lineup generator packages. You get 25% off any package when you sign up using the promo code Greg, my name, GREG, all capital letters at checkout. So let's get into this week's slate. And also, before we get into it, do me a favor, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. So I use our PGA Sims, and I go into PGA DFS Simulator, and a couple things you're going to see on screen here. I'll go to the contest generator. This is where I start by building out my lineups. Is you want to make sure you have the sport selected that you're going to be playing. You want to have the site playing on that you want. So DraftKings, FanDuel, those are the two that we support for PGA. And then also want to make sure you have the right slate selected, because we also do support some of the showdown slates. So if you want to play showdown, that's also supported in here. I'm going to be building lineups for the main slate. And then pool size. Generally want to make this as close to the size of the contest pool that you are going to be playing in. So for instance, if you are playing in one of the really big large field tournaments for PGA, you probably want to select 10,000 because that is going to be what's closest to representative of the field. But you might be playing a single entry contest that only has 1,000 or 2,000 entries. If that's the case, select one of those. There's also a couple of different Sims packages. We have our max package that lets you build up to 10,000 lineups, and then our base package that lets you build 500 lineups, which is better for some lower stakes players or people that are playing some smaller field single entry stuff. Then what you want to do is you want to select your contest archetype. So this is another one too that is going to depend on the contest that you're playing in. If you're playing in one of those large field GPPs, like the $5 150 max contest or the $20 150 max contest, you want to select the marquee setting. But let's say you're playing in something like a 10-cent contest or a quarter arcade, things along those lines, then you'd want to select low stakes. And then if you're playing in a high stakes contest, let's say like, you know, the Thunderdome or something with like a $5,000 entry or $1,000 entry, then you'd select high stakes for that. But for this, going to be building marquee lineups, and also so you guys don't have to watch the lineups being built here on screen, which doesn't take all that long. It only takes like 60 seconds. But hey, I don't want to waste any of your time. So I've already built out lineups. And if you do have lineups that you want to save from a previous run you've done, you can restore your last pool, and that'll bring up lineups that you've already built. If you want to make any alterations to your contest pool, you could do this right here by changing some of the ownerships on players, and then you could rerun the lineup. So what you do want to do with the lineups you build in the contest generator is you want them to be as close to what the field is expected to do as possible. So you get a really accurate simulation of the contest. So you don't just want to change this because you think you want to get somebody to more lineups or anything like that. You do that in the simulation aspect of what I'm going to be doing here. For this, though, the only reason you want to make a change is if something like you're looking at Victor Hovland, who we have in 27% of lineups, and if you say, hey, I think Victor Hovland is going to be like 35% owned, then you could boost his ownership, rerun lineups, and make a new set of lineups with the ownership on Victor Hovland closer to what you expect it to be. But if you don't have your own ownership projections, you're just riding with what we have here, then after you have your lineups built, you could go simulate lineups. Now, from this page, you've got stuff that's pretty self-explanatory in terms of what sport you're playing, what site, which slate. One thing you do want to make sure is accurate to the contest you're playing in is the percentage payout to first place. So this is going to be whatever first place plays in the contest divided by the total prize pool. So if the contest pays $100,000 to first and it's a $400,000 prize pool, 100,000 divided by 400,000, that'd be 25%. So you'd have 25% selected. Most contests on DraftKings and FanDuel pay out around 25%, but not all of them. So always check to make sure that you do have the right one selected, because that is going to make some alterations to the individual golfers as well as the lineups that you end up getting in your set of lineups. But for this, I'm just going to have 25% selected. If you have your own projections, or if you're taking projections from somewhere else, you could upload them using the upload custom projections here. Really simple. You just want to have a CSV that has the player name, that's the name of the golfer, one that says projection, that's the fantasy point projection of the golfer, and then another column that says ownership for your projected ownership of the golfer. The default settings, it's just the projections we have at Stokastic. So if that's what you're using, which is what I use, then you just run the contest settings as is. If you do want to change anything here, though, you can make some minor alterations to golfers. Like, let's just say you think Rory should be projected for 88 fantasy points. You could change him to 88. You could click this to roll it back. If you want to just simply make him one fantasy point projected higher, you can press the plus. If you want to make them one lower, you press the minus here. So if you do want to tweak individual golfers because you think they should be projected higher or lower, you could certainly do that on this screen as well. After that's all set, what you're going to want to do is run the contest simulation. And now what's happening when we're running the contest simulation is the contest is going to be simulated out 40,000 times on what's called a play-by-play simulation. So every single hole, every single shot that each golfer hits, they're going to play every single round out here, the entire tournament, 40,000 times on a shot-by-shot basis. And from here, what it's going to do is it's going to take all the lineups we built in the contest generator, and it's going to sort them based on how profitable those individual lineups were in a contest setting when they're all playing against each other. And this is where the percentage to first payout also is going to play a factor, because if you have, say, a 10% to first payout selected, that's a much flatter payout structure. And that could lead to something like chalkier lineups, because you don't have to be quite as different to have a lineup that cashes quite as well. Because if you guys have ever noticed when you're playing on DraftKings or FanDuel, but contests that pay out really top heavy, when there's bigger contest pools that go to first place, there also is a trickle down where like 10th place pays out less when it's 30% to first as compared to when it's 10% to first. So the different kinds of lineups you get, they are going to be impacted by this percentage to first payout when our lineups are sorted here in a second. Simulation is almost done being run. You can always track it by looking at that blue bar. And once again, like on the contest generator, it doesn't take all that long, like 60 to 90 seconds. That's all it takes for the simulation tool to simulate the slate out 40,000 times. And then you'll see here when the lineups are done, they're all going to be sorted for us based on simulated ROI. I'm going to favorite my top 150 lineups here. And when you're looking at the simulated ROI, this is based on all those runs of the sims that we did, the 40,000 times these lineups played against each other in a tournament setting. This is what the average return on investment was for each of those lineups, and they're sorted in order of what that return was. And this is really the best overall catch-all metric to measure your lineups by. It's much more telling than something like fantasy points or percentage of time that those lineups end up winning, because the overall return, that's taking into account how often it cashes, how often it wins, how often it finishes towards the top 10% of a lineup. Lots of metrics all go into that simulated ROI. And then you'll see here, if you just sort by fantasy point projection, there could be some lineups that end up being in our top 150. Like this one down here has a 50% sim ROI, and it was one of the top 150 lineups. But you see the top, like 20, 25 lineups here, just by fantasy point projections, actually aren't the lineups that are expected to be most profitable. So I always am sorting and entering my lineups by the simulated ROI. Now, if we want to go check our exposures, we can see the golfers that on this run I ended up getting the most exposure to. You'll see Will Zalatoris showing up in the most of my lineups. The exposure, that's the percentage of the lineups he is in for me. This is his fantasy point projection, and this is what his ownership projection is based on our ownership from the contest generator that we ran before. So you can see that not only do I have a lot of Will Zalatoris, but he's also expected to be relatively contrarian. And then the leverage here, because I'm well overweight to the field on him, he's projected for 5% ownership just about. I have 42% of lineups. That's why we have that 37% leverage rating. The golfers that you have the highest leverage score on, those are the ones you're overweight to, you're going to be rooting for. And then you could sort this and you can see which golfers you're underweight to in this particular run. Now, if you ever want to make adjustments to the golfers, like maybe you're uncertain about Will Zalatoris, who a couple weeks ago did have to withdraw from a tournament because his back started bothering him. We do know that Will Zalatoris over the last couple of years has had back issues, missed a bunch of time last year because he had back surgery. Well, what you could do in here is you could go into the ROI boost and you could say, you know what, not that comfortable with Will Zalatoris. I'm going to give him a negative 15% ROI boost. And what that is going to do on the lineups page now is every single lineup that has Will Zalatoris in it is going to get a 15% ROI downgrade. And that is going to make it so we refavorite our top 150 lineups. Now you're going to see that we have much less Will Zalatoris. He went from being in 40% of our lineups to 14%. So those are some of the little alterations that you can make if you want to give yourself either more or less of a golfer, because you do the same by going into the ROI boost, and you could upgrade a golfer as well. So let's say you want more of Corey Connors. We'll give him a 10% ROI boost. And then if we go back to our lineups, same thing as before, unfavorite the top 150 and then refavorite them with the ROI boost. Then when you go in here, you'll see that Corey Connors has now gone from 30% of our lineups up to 50%. And you could also do this with as many golfers as you want. If you want to clear the boosts and just go back to the default for everybody, you could clear the boosts, then click Boost ROI. And now you'll see when we go back into here, unfavorite our top 150 and refavorite them, we're going to end back with our initial exposures with Will Zalatoris at the 42%. So those are the little alterations you could make with lineups to make them a little bit more personalized for yourself. And then you could also do exposure caps as well. So if you, let's say you don't want any golfer to be in more than 20% of lineups, you could go in here, you could select 20%, and then you go set exposures and adjust favorites. And now when you go to the exposures, you'll see that we are now going to have no more than 20% of any given golfer. Not saying that's what you should necessarily do, but it is an option available to you if that is something you want to do to balance out some of your exposures. You could also do the exposure caps with individual golfers as opposed to it being just an overall exposure cap that's the same for every single golfer. You could also go in here and you could say, see, we'll go back to 100% for this, but let's change Will Zalatoris to 30%. Remember, he was in 42% of lineups before. Now, if we set exposures and adjust favorites, we should have 30% of Will Zalatoris. Yeah, right there, 30%. So if you ever want to customize your lineups, that's the easiest way to do it, unless you also want to upload some of your own custom projections. So then after you have a set of lineups that you do feel comfortable with as the ones that you do want to enter, then you just click export favorites. You could upload those lineups directly to DraftKings, FanDuel, whatever site you're playing on, and your set of lineups is done. So that's the way that I use the Sims tool. Pretty easy. I honestly don't even make that many adjustments for golf. Personally, I'm not somebody who knows a ton about PGA DFS in the same way that I do about other sports, where I might be making my own projections or really managing my lineups. I kind of just run a lot of the default settings for golf, upload those lineups, and then see how they do. And it worked out really well for me on Sunday. If we want to also, we could look in the post-contest simulator and you could look at how your lineups, not just how they performed in actual terms, because you already know that information. If you put in $20 on a slate, you get back $40. You know what the actual results of your lineups were. I really do like looking at previous slates, though, just to see, have I actually built good lineups? Because one thing that can happen in DFS, especially with tournaments that pay out really top heavy, just because you built good lineups and rostered the best expected individual golfers on a slate, it doesn't mean you're going to be profitable on every single one. So I always like to look at our post-contest sims just to make sure that I'm on the right track and I'm building good lineups. So if we go and we review the tournament that I won last week, here, let's filter by all the people who played 150 lineups. Filter 150. You see that I came in first place, and I did have one of the highest expected sim ROIs of anybody who played 150 lineups. I had a 21.9% simulated ROI on the set of lineups I entered. Tied with Epi here, also was at 121.9, and there was only a few people who were better. So overall, my set of lineups was judged based on our post-contest sims be the fourth best set of lineups that anybody entered. And then from my perspective, what I also really liked is that you could see that my actual return on investment here was 6,627.2% because I came in first place and did really well for that tournament. Now, you could also look at some other metrics here, like your simulated average fantasy points. So on average, my lineups were expected to score 433.8 fantasy points, when in reality, they ended up outperforming projections, ended up scoring 526. And you could see that on average, my lineups had 76.1% ownership across them. You could also look at the individual lineup ROI. So you could see of all the lineups that are played by everybody in the field, which lineups were expected to have the highest ROI. And then you could also look at the individual golfer ROI. So you could see who are some of the golfers that projected to have the highest sim ROI. You could also, if you're searching yourself, you could click on your name. You could see the golfers that you had the most exposure to. You could see what the ROI was for them in your lineups as projected, and then also what the overall sim ROI was for all those individual golfers. So one thing that people had pointed out about the lineup that won is that I played Sammy Valmaki in it, and he was very low owned. He was only projected for 0.6% ownership. But one thing you see is that based on our sims, he actually was a very, very good golfer to get to last week. He was projected with a 21.4% sim ROI. So that was actually the highest mark of any golfer that I played in the entire tournament. And then any lineup that actually had Valmaki in it, they ended up having over 3,000% ROI. So people who played Valmaki, those lineups performed very well last week. You could see that the lineups that I had in here, they were simulated to have a 48.8% ROI. And I was also overweight to the field to him. Not that I had a massive amount of Valmaki. I had 3.3% of them, but only at 0.6% ownership. And you see, there were a lot of golfers that were very low owned, 1%, less than 1%, that I was overweight to the field to. And a lot of these golfers did end up having a positive sim ROI. So I took a lot of chances on really, really low owned golfers. And a couple of them ended up coming through for me. Sammy Valmaki, most notably, CT Pan being another one who was in my winning lineup last week. So if you guys want to sign up for our Sims package or any of the other tools at Stokastic, not just for golf, but for any other sport, sign up using the promo code Greg. Get yourself 25% off. If you have any questions for me, I'm always available on Twitter at Ehrenberg DFS. My DMs are open. If you got any questions at all, hit me up. There's no dumb questions. I'm happy to answer any of them. And then also, if you haven't done yet, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and good luck with your PGA lineups this week.